Let's talk about marijuana is worse than alcohol, or alcohol is worse than marijuana. What's the fact?
That's a great question. So a lot of people will say, well, it's no worse than alcohol. And certainly I understand that perspective, but it's really important to realize that alcohol also has a wide variety of risks. So alcohol is implicated in a lot of motor vehicle accidents. It's associated with assault, with homicide, with suicide over time. Heavy alcohol use or alcohol use disorder, alcoholism, leads to cardiovascular disease, liver disease. So being no worse than alcohol is not really a high bar necessarily. Alcohol has its own set of harms.
Okay, next myth, it's not addictive. Marijuana is not addictive.
That's a myth I really don't like, because the reality is we know that cannabis is addictive. Cannabis use disorder is the technical term for addiction to cannabis. It doesn't happen to most people who use cannabis, but it does happen to a proportion. About 7% of Canadians over their lifetime will meet criteria for cannabis addiction. And that's not a small number if you think about the large number of people who actually use cannabis.
Okay, let's talk about who's most at risk.
Well, in the general population, with legalization, I actually don't think that there will be dramatic differences, although of course we're going to study that to see whether there are big changes. But there are certain parts of the population that are particularly vulnerable. And for example, young adults to me are a very high risk group. We know that typically people first try cannabis during young adulthood, as teenagers or in their early 20s. And during that same period, the brain is still developing, and it's not fully developed in terms of the frontal lobes until the mid-20s.
Okay, so would you say as a parent I should do prohibition until mid-20s?
As a parent, I think that your work's cut out for you. And I don't have black and white answers so much as, and I'm a parent myself, I think that the important thing is to engage with your kid and to have the conversation about cannabis early and often to find out what they know and hopefully provide them with the best information possible.
Okay, other side of the spectrum, seniors.
Yes.
What's the risk for seniors on cannabis?
Well, interestingly, seniors are showing the largest proportionate increase in cannabis use, in part because there's a lot of interest in using it to treat a lot of conditions that are often associated with being an older adult. There are a lot of risks, because one of the risks of cannabis is motor impairment or coordination impairment, and seniors are already at risk for falls. So we recognize that that could be a further issue. There also can be drug interactions, and most of the time people think about drug interactions between prescribed medications, but cannabis also interacts with other prescriptions, and seniors are often taking more than one prescribed medication too.
And your medicinal research is really showing a lot of big cautions and red flags about the medicinal use.
I wouldn't call them red flags. What we know is that there has been a skyrocketing increase in the number of Canadians who have sought out cannabis for medical purposes. But there hasn't been a skyrocketing increase in the evidence for its utility for a lot of the conditions that people are using it for. So our perspective is we really need to have an evidence-based perspective of medical cannabis. We need more data to show which conditions it really helps compared to a placebo and which conditions it may not be helpful with. And that's what we're really trying to promote at the DeGroote Centre.
Okay, so medical needs aside, how do people cope with the anxiety, just the need to check out that's causing them to want to just enjoy a marijuana toke?
Sure. Well, I think that we're not anti-cannabis, we're not pro-cannabis. In terms of the DeGroote Centre, we're pro-evidence. And in general, we're not asking people to necessarily abstain from every substance that's available from a recreational standpoint. But we are really mindful of the fact that there are risks. There are risks in terms of acute intoxication, whether it be from cannabis or from alcohol. And there are risks over time in terms of long-term use. So we really want to make sure that people are aware of the risks when they do choose to engage in recreational use.